You are listening to AccessUW, a podcast series brought to you by the University of Washington Office of the ADA Coordinator, where we highlight insightful discussions, informative interviews, and valuable insights about accessibility, equity, and inclusion, all within the realm of higher education with experts across the UW. In terms of accessibility, each podcast and a transcript are made available at the Office of the ADA Coordinator's website at www.washington.edu/ADA. Well, welcome back to another installation of the AccessUW podcast. This is Toby speaking, one of your moderators for this podcast. And today we're going to be talking a little bit more about website accessibility, the resources that we have on campus, and just a few practical tips on how to make your websites accessible. Moderating with me today is our typical ADA host, Bree Callahan. Bree, would you like to say hi to our audience?
Hello, Husky listeners. This is Bree Callahan, the university's ADA coordinator. Happy to be with you again. The only part I'll add to this is been recorded in advance of the upcoming events on Global Accessibility Day. So this will be part of a kind of a unique series to help highlight those events.
Yeah, thank you for adding that, Bree. And this is the UW's 9th annual Global Accessibility Awareness Day, or GAD for short. And we're grateful to have our manager for accessible technology services here, Terrell Thompson, to speak a little bit on website accessibility specifically in celebration of this Awareness Day, as well as our ongoing commitment to ensure digital accessibility. Terrell, as you're new here, would you mind giving a brief introduction to our listeners, just including your role and maybe a little bit background about you and your work in accessibility?
Sure. Thanks, Toby and Bree. It's good to be here chatting with you guys today. I am Terrell Thompson, a manager of the IT accessibility team, which is part of UWIT Accessible Technology Services. And so as a team, we are responsible for digital accessibility throughout the university. So all three campuses plus UW Medicine. And obviously that's not something we can do alone. It takes the entire university to ensure that all of our technology is accessible. But we play just kind of a central role in supporting that effort, consulting, providing some remediation services for digital documents and videos, providing training, providing support, developing resources, anything we can do to help the university, then we're all about that. And websites, of course, is certainly a big part of the digital accessibility landscape. So I've been doing this for about 25 years now at the University of Washington. So I'm a long timer, and it's great. We've been seeing progress over the years, but an unprecedented level of progress now, thanks to the ADA Digital Accessibility Initiative. Got a lot of people on board, and we're getting a lot of requests for our services, people seeking help, related to web accessibility and digital accessibility in general.
Thank you for that little introduction, Terrell. And I definitely want to get into a little bit more of the resources that we have on campus, both from what ATS and the IT accessibility team provides, as well as just the guidance that we have on our websites. But let's first kind of jump it down to the baseline around websites, and specifically some of the nuances and just understanding that people have about website accessibility. So one common thing since really starting digital accessibility, probably something that you've heard a lot in your work doing this for over 25 years now, is that a lot of people lack the understanding of why a website needs to be accessible and why necessarily that is beneficial to individuals with disabilities. So I'm curious if you can speak of, one, just the impact that barriers can have on individuals with disabilities when they're accessing website information, as well as just some of those common barriers that you've seen on UW pages or just other pages that you have navigated as a user yourself.
Yeah, I like to think of accessibility really broadly, that the World Wide Web was created to provide access to information at an unprecedented level at the time. It's all of a sudden people could access resources from anywhere in the world on a wide variety of different tools. So you've got web browsers. People have choices of web browsers. These days, you can access the web on your mobile device, on your tablet, on your desktop computer. Everybody has different needs, but they all want to access the same information. So information that can be delivered to anybody using whatever their preferred device, preferred platform, any assistive technologies they're using, any, unique configurations they're using, it should be accessible to everybody. So that really is all what it's all about. So, you know, individuals with disabilities are just one part of that massive group of people that is everybody. And if we look specifically at individual groups within the disability community who are impacted, you know, a lot of websites were sort of built with mice in mind. And so, you have to hover over something in order to get content to appear. And not everybody is a mouse user. And so that's one, really common example that if something is dependent on you being a mouse user, then anybody who is not a mouse user is going to be excluded from that. And so there are a lot of people who have repetitive stress injuries or other physical disabilities that prevent them from using a mouse. They may be using a keyboard instead and just pressing the tab key to navigate through a website. They should be able to access everything that a mouse user can access. We also talk a lot in the accessibility community about people who are unable to see websites. So a blind person navigating with a screen reader might be listening to content audibly using synthesized speech, or they might be using a braille device to access that content, also using a screen reader, but just delivering the content in a different way. So not everybody is accessing content visually. There are lots of different ways to access content. And so that has a huge impact if a web page is not created with good structure, for example. Headings play a really important role where you've got, most pages do have a heading structure, top level heading, and then subheadings, that would be in HTML terms, H1 for the main heading, H2 for the subheadings. And so a screen reader user can jump from heading to heading to heading, just like a sighted user can kind of hone in visually on particular sections based on their headings. And it needs to be coded properly in order for a screen reader user to have that capability. If it's just big, bold text, not really a heading, then screen readers are not going to understand the structure of the document, and they're not going to be able to jump from heading to heading. So that's a really simple feature of an accessible website, an example of accessible web content. But also, it's not just about the web. I mean, that same idea, good headings, is also applies to Word docs and PDF docs and Canvas pages. Any sort of document authoring format has the ability to create good heading structure. It's just up to authors to be aware of that and to use that. So the same is true of alt text. So if we use images to communicate content, then adding alternative text or alt text behind the scenes, which is a short description, so screen reader users can access the content of that image. That too is a common issue on web pages, but also in digital documents like Word docs and PDF. So a lot of these ideas are not just web specific, but they transcend all sort of digital communications.
Terrell, when you talk about this stuff, what comes to mind that I just want to highlight for those who are listening, this might be new to them. We've always had longstanding codes of how we build buildings, right? And kind of put some of the structure together. But the difference here, I mean, there's still codes, right? There's these standards in the websites. But once you build a building, right, it's there, right? It's structurally there. It's not like we change our buildings all the time, right? We build them for 50 to 100 years. With a website, you can change those things pretty quickly, right? If a unit wants to pivot, right, and add something different, I mean, it's a more fluid process. So I'm also see like the value in you to change is you need to adapt a business, but you have to be really aware in this space, right? And a little differently than in our physical environment, because things can change so quickly, and so it's really important to be mindful of the impact you have on who you're trying to reach.
Exactly. Yeah, and that there are pluses and minuses of that. That it's difficult if you discover your building needs an elevator, then that's going to be a major change are much simpler. So you discover that you got an accessibility problem. A lot of times you can fix that really quickly. Right then and there, you can fix that problem. And in some cases, you can fix it in a template or a theme, and it applies to all of your web pages at once. So one quick fix, and you've done a huge amount of good through that. So the converse of that is you can also break things very easily. So it may be perfectly accessible today, and then you add some new content or you add a new feature, and you've broken accessibility, which is, I know we're going to talk about accessibility checkers, but that's why, having an accessibility checker that is part of your design and development workflow that you constantly monitor. So it's not just a one-time thing, but you are always, checking to see if any new accessibility problems have been introduced. Because sometimes that does happen, even, if you have the best intentions, accidents happen, and it's good to have tools sort of helping us to detect that stuff.
Appreciate that, Daryl. And something I heard you mention as well too, of when you were kind of getting into the heading structures of headings being labeled as H1, H2 in HTML format and how that shows up. And I think there's a lot of myths around digital accessibility and how to actually build that. And one really common thing that I've heard from folks is that they need to be very proficient in either coding or writing HTML in order to make a website accessible. So I'm curious from your perspective if you believe this is true, especially in the scope of the University of Washington, where one of our main systems of producing and delivering websites are through our WordPress. So I'm curious to see what your take is on this, of how difficult or how much technical knowledge you need to know to actually make a website accessible.
Yeah, there are a lot of different roles, right? So a lot of people contribute to the making of a website. So nobody does that on their own generally these days. And so the amount of knowledge and skill that's required varies depending on what your role is. So I will say that it is important to be proficient in accessible coding if you are a developer and you're creating the framework, the theme, those sorts of things. You have that kind of role, then you need to understand what is the proper way to code things. We talk a lot about ARIA, which is a specification from the W3C specifically designed for accessibility, stands for Accessible Rich Internet Applications. And a developer needs to know about ARIA, and they need to know how to use it correctly. But most people don't. So that's just the developer side of things. And we've got tools actually here at the University of Washington. We got DQ University, which is a training, a curriculum, a library of asynchronous online trainings that really do. You can go from very easy, sort of lightweight accessibility content to a deep dive into accessible coding. And so for those developers, they do have a resource, and everybody else has a resource too. This is a really great curriculum for everybody, and anybody with a UW Net ID can take advantage of that. But so anyway, yes, developers need that. But in designers, if you're doing sort of the design and working in cascading style sheets to affect the way a site looks, then that they too need some accessibility knowledge. So one common problem on websites, I talked about keyboard accessibility. You should be able to access everything with a keyboard. A lot of times websites are accessible with keyboard, but you can't tell where you are. So somebody is pressing tab and tab and tab and tab and tab, and they have no idea where on the page they are right now, which element has focus. And so that is a behind the scenes cascading style sheets issue, very simple to fix, but somebody does need to have access to their style sheet and know how to code that. So that's two groups who do need, a little bit of coding, expertise within the scope of their role, but most people don't. Most people are content authors, and so, you mentioned WordPress. If we've got a WordPress site and they just have access, to the editor in WordPress, and that's where they put their content in, first of all, the website owner does need to choose a theme that is accessible. So they don't have to do that coding. They just have to trust that they've chosen, a theme or a template that has accessibility built in. And if you're using the standard boundless theme, which is provided by University Marketing Communications, that is, you can trust that that's going to be accessible. They've worked very hard to make sure that that is true, and they work closely with us in ATS on an ongoing basis as they introduce new features and make changes. Then we're at the table helping them to do that in an accessible way. So if you're using the boundless theme, then there are just some really simple things that you as a content author need to be aware of. Things like headings, that headings should form an outline. And so you've got that built into the editor. You can choose, heading 2 or heading 3 or whatever the case may be, so that your headings form an outline within your document. You can add alt text to images. So anytime you add an image, you're prompted to add alt text, so a description of that image. Or if it's just a decorative image, there's a box that you can check in WordPress to say this is just a decorative image. And in other platforms too, Canvas, Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, you've got that same checkbox and that same option. So add alt text to an image, or check the box that says this is just decorative, and then screen readers will ignore that. Also, you can use good link text. So this is another common problem, is people will use things like URLs for link text, and a URL makes really awful link text, or a phrase like click here or read more. The idea is that link text should stand alone independently of context. So if a screen reader pulls up a list of links, then they should be able to navigate through that list of links and know what's going to happen if they select that link. And if all the links say click here, or if all the links are really long URLs, then it's not going to be obvious at all. It might not be, at all ascertainable what's going to happen if they click that link. So this also impacts speech input users. Somebody who's using voice input to control their computer, can say things like click. If it's a link to the University of Washington, they could say click University of Washington, and it will click the link that goes to the University of Washington. But imagine you've got a long URL as the link text, then they have to say, click https:// blah, 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 much more difficult to follow links that way. So that's just, and color contrast is another, tip to, make sure that your foreground and background colors have really good contrast so that it's easy for people to see. And that impacts, everybody. Just makes your content that much more readable and easy to access. So those are a few tips that are just kind of the easy stuff that content authors need to understand and be aware of.
Thanks, Harold, and I appreciate you highlighting some of those tips, just from descriptive link text, color contrast, using heading structures. And then that's a lot that comes into the actual building and being the person of developing content itself. But I'm kind of want to get into this element of creating sustainable content here. And this, how can we ongoingly check our websites and ensuring that content remains accessible over a period of time? And I know the University of Washington just procured an enterprise-wide license for a program called Dubbot. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about Dubbot and how this can benefit specifically site owners, editors who are using WordPress specifically, and how can this really help with the sustainability of accessibility in websites?
Yeah, and just I'll use this opportunity to clarify one thing that is the common source of confusion, and that is Dubbot was not created by the University of Washington. A lot of people think it was because it's got Dub in the name, but that's just a coincidence that we didn't even think about when we selected this product. So we chose this. There are lots of tools out there like this, but this was the one that was selected through an RFP process. And it does a lot of things. It checks not only accessibility, but also checks for broken links and spelling errors. And as I mentioned earlier, sort of having a tool like this integrated into your workflow and used on a regular basis is really sort of key to using it effectively. So it's not just a one-time thing where you go into Dubbot and it tells you, it gives you a report on all the accessibility issues that it found, and then you go through and you fix all of those, and it sort of helps, provides guidance along the way, lots of different features that help you to understand the issues that it's identified, and so that you can fix them. And then it will recrawl your site and your score will improve. So it gives you an accessibility score and you can track progress over time. And we as a university can track progress over time for all of our sites. And so that's, it is important to continually monitor. So, as a new user, fix all your issues or as many issues as you can, fix. And sometimes some of them are harder than others, and sometimes you're dependent on third-party tools. If you've got embedded content, then the maker of that content may need to do something in order, for accessibility, for your site to be fully accessible. But you can fix a lot of things, and there have been a lot of UW sites that have attained perfect scores. So 100 is attainable. And people often ask, what's the goal? What's the score that I have to meet? We haven't actually declared as a university that, you must have a score of 90 or above or anything like that. But I usually just say, do your best. And there are quite a few sites actually that have attained that perfect score now. So it is doable. But once again, you do that once, but then continue to check the tool for any new problems that might have come into your site. Anytime you're adding new content, you may introduce some accessibility problems without thinking about it. Or the fact that it also checks broken links and spelling errors, also just sort of reinforces that. Broken links can happen even if you don't touch your site, because those links may get broken, on the link on the the receiving site side of things. And so that's just reinforces that it's important to continue to use this tool, continue to go back in, check your site, and particularly as you do add new content, check that. I like to say it's good to sort of develop good habits, so anytime you're creating content, use good heading structure, use good link text. If you add images, always add alt text immediately to that image that you just added. And if you develop those good habits, then the likelihood that you're going to introduce new accessibility problems is small, but it's still possible, because we're all imperfect and things happen. And so that's why having a tool that is constantly checking things and will flag any problems that creep in, is really, handy to have.
What I love about this tool is it's been purchased for the whole enterprise to use. So there's no cost for a unit to use it. It's already centrally provided, and we're just now encouraging people to opt in if they haven't already been designated as a critical website that we have to have in initially. So for listeners out there, please opt in so you can ensure that your websites are accessible to all the users that you're trying to communicate with or share information with. It's a pretty straightforward process. We'll have links available on the AccessUW podcast page for this episode. I also think it's really great just to like operationalize, right? Like you want to always refresh your content, right? And you have perhaps processes in place, right, to do that. So this is to me, this is just add this checker and like refreshing your information and checking using the checker to keep your content up to date, right? And accessible for your for all those who are trying to seek out, right, your information. So I just would flag that for everybody else who's listening. But it's free. Everybody can opt in at present. Hopefully all the tools and tips that are out there that are easy to consume, makes your experience really smooth in this, but then there's central resources for things that are more complex that you can consult on.
Yeah, thanks, Bree. And all the links will definitely be below the podcast if you're on the ADA office website specifically. But Terrell, as we wrap up here, I want to hear from you as well too. If I know Dubbot is a great tool that we have, but I know ATS and UW IT Accessibility Services has a bunch of different resources on their website, specifically on how to make websites accessible, all the way to different documents, of course, content as well too. So I'm curious if you had to pick maybe a top three of websites that you would suggest to folks of where they should get started to start learning. What would you recommend on your website of where they can start navigating?
Well, for websites specifically, I would send them to our own websites web page, our page on accessible technology websites. And again, you guys will provide the URL. Um, but the message to website owners or anybody that has some responsibility for a website is we've kind of broken it down into 5 steps. And so on this webpage, you can sort of look at the 5 steps, and then we've got links to resources related to each of those 5 steps. So the five steps are to first build an understanding of digital accessibility. And so we've got links to some of the resources that we particularly recommend for people that are just getting started or want to know, about website accessibility. Then, here's where to go. Step 2 is to clean house. And there's a whole concept. I don't know if you guys are talking about this in any of your podcasts, but with the ADA rule, there's the concept of archiving content that is no longer actively maintained and no longer required reading, but may still serve a referential function. Then it needs to be identified as an archive in order to meet the requirements of the ADA rule. And so University Marketing Communication has developed an archive banner plugin in WordPress that has UW branded archive identification built into it. And so that's a really nice resource that anybody's using a WordPress site can tap into. But otherwise, just sort of deleting stuff that is no longer needed. There's a lot of that needs to happen out there, just sort of obsolete materials that get built and put up on the web and left forever, and they really don't need to be there any longer. And so that's an essential part, essential step in the process of making sure your website is accessible. Step 3 is to use UW branded themes. So again, UMac, University Marketing Communications, has created accessible themes, and they're out there both for WordPress and for Drupal. And they're available if you're using the UW Sites network. They're available within that as well. So it's just important to choose themes and templates that have accessibility baked in, and then that's a lot less that you need to be thinking about. And then step 4 is to prioritize and review your website. So reviewing them, this section of our webpage has links to tools and resources, links to Dubbot, links to some other resources that we provide, and as well as some advice on sort of how to test your website. And then finally, step 5 is get help. And so that's again, that's the role that we play. And so feel free to take advantage of the consulting services that we provide. Ideally, follow the first 4 steps, to kind of get yourself acclimated and develop a core understanding of what this is all about and what the tools are. And then if you have questions, then reach out to us, and we're happy to help.
Great. Thank you so much, Cheryl. I really appreciate that. And as mentioned prior as well, too, all of these will be under the podcast for you to explore and get started or continue your journey in building accessible websites or just understanding of digital accessibility. Bree or Terrell, do you have anything, final comments that you would like to say before we close this episode out?
I don't know that I have anything other than just thank you. I appreciate the opportunity again to have this conversation with you guys and to promote the accessibility of the UW web. I mean, it is, since we've got Dubbot in place, and we're already seeing that gives us the ability to monitor accessibility, and we are seeing improvement over time just in a couple months that it's been out there. People are using it, and they're actively working to improve their accessibility. And if this is coming out prior to Global Accessibility Awareness Day, I'd also like to do a plug for some of the activities that we're doing associated with GAD. We have morning workshops on some of these specific issues that we've talked about. So there are Fix Your Accessibility workshops, 3 of them in the morning dedicated to headings, alt text, and color contrast. And each of those was selected because they apply not just to websites, but also to digital documents and Canvas pages and pretty much any other digital communication platform. So we'll provide a little bit of instruction on each of those to sort of kick the session off. And then it's just a time when people can work on fixing those issues in their environment and asking questions along the way, if they encounter snags or are confused about anything. So, and that's a hybrid event. So we're going to have a room in the hub where we're meeting face to face, but also engaging simultaneously with people out there via Zoom. And then in the afternoon, there's a midday program too with several speakers. And then in the afternoon, we have a 2-hour block for more Fix Your Accessibility work, but specifically in DubBot. And so people who have their websites in DubBot and want to work together to fix the problems that DubBot identifies, we're all going to be doing that together for a couple of hours. And our vendor rep, Penny from DubBot, is going to be joining us for that entire 2 hours as well. And so she'll be available online to help answer questions for anybody, that again runs into any, source of confusion. So it's going to be a great day. Lots of stuff, and there's more than what I just mentioned. We'll provide a link again, but the GAD 2025 page has a full lineup of all the activities that are happening and links to register for those.
I'm excited. It's going to be a good one, as it always is. So the only thing I would add is just that this is a journey and not a destination, something that Terrell and I talk about a lot in this work. So wherever you are at in your experience in this, if you're new or advanced, like there's a community here to help centralize tools, resources to help get you on the journey or continue on it. And so I think we have great staff here, Terrell's team and company, but the broader network that exists. So hope the listeners got something that they could start action on, or at least go seek more information after this podcast.
That is all we have for today. Until the next time, again, there's going to be a series of some podcasts that are focusing specifically on Global Accessibility Awareness Day, as well as just digital accessibility. So feel free to see if those are now live as well too. So Terrell, just thank you one more time.
Yep. Thank you guys. And thanks everybody for listening.